Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is the NetConf Working Group 112 virtual meeting. Kent, do you want to go ahead and actually enable the notepad if it is not?
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now.
Okay. All right. By participating in the IETF, you agree to follow the following IETF processes and policies. If you are not familiar with them, please do familiarize yourself with them. You are here in this Meet Echo session, so you don't need the link. Watch the chat window for comments, and I believe it can be made a separate window if you want. We have 1 hour. We requested for 1 hour slot for the NetConf agenda. We will try to stick to the time that's allocated for each speaker, as pretty much tight on time. There will be a countdown timer at the bottom of the screen to help guide the speakers. Try to stick to that time. We don't hope to have to cut off the microphone in case we run out of time. As usual, remember to cue yourself in Meet Echo by clicking on the hand symbol. And to speak, remember to unmute yourself. At the end, do remember to remove yourself from the queue. And we should have a CodeMD window up ready for anyone to put in their notes. Actually, do help us by contributing.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think it is set up right now. If you go to in the top menu note-taking tool, click there, you should see it initialized.
Okay, thanks, Kent. All right. We are going to ask the presenters to present their own slides, so it should go relatively smoothly. This is new for everyone. So where are we with this charted list of workgroup items? The Yang push notification capabilities is, of course, past IETF review. It's in the RFC editor queue at this point. Kent will talk about his suite of drafts, the client-server suite of drafts, in the next slide. The HTTPS notification draft, Kent and I being the authors on it, believe have addressed all the open issues, and we believe it's ready for publication. Rob, did you want to go ahead and, okay, let me grant you.
I think I can just, I think I just, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, yes, thank you for this. So yes, I think that's good. One question to the working group is, if anyone is offering to be the document shepherd for this document, that would be appreciated. I mean, I can go around asking, but if anyone would like to do that, then that would be helpful for me, if they can do so.
Okay.
So drop me an email if interested. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Rob. The Yang push notification messages expired today. I know that this draft has been on hold waiting for HTTPS notification to get done. Now that is done, we would ask the authors, if they're here, otherwise offline, to revive the draft and post an update and proceed with trying to finalize the draft. The UDP notif draft is a work in progress and is going to be discussed in this meeting today. Kent, any comments? Oh, sorry. Let's move to distributed note of draft, and then maybe we can come back to if anyone has any comments. The distributed note of draft is a workgroup document. It expires soon if it hasn't already expired. The authors, I don't know what the plan is as from the authors, but do they plan to continue working on it? If they bring, they would, I think that they would like to bring the discussion back on the mailing list and make progress on the draft. So we hope to see some activity. The SCTP CSR draft is, I believe I saw a post today from Kent. And you just updated and addressed some comments.
Correct. Yeah, it was a duplicate paragraph. I had to be removed, so I just removed that paragraph and reposted it. At this point, it should be ready for Rob.
All right. So Ken, do you want to go ahead and, sorry, Rob, go ahead, Rob.
Yes, so I think this is done. So I will send this on for IETF last call. Thanks.
Okay. Right. Over to you, Kent.
Right. Okay. For the client server suite of drafts, so first and foremost, we've completed the last call on the entire suite of drafts. The last two NetConf client server and RESTConf client server last calls, I think we declared completion on about 2 or 3 weeks ago. After soliciting feedback and not receiving any objections, we've decided to move forward with the process. And then, but there are some issues pending. And on the right-hand side, there's 2 are listed, but actually there's a third as well I need to speak to. So firstly, you may recall in the TLS client server draft, there's an open pending issue that came out of the last call for how to support raw public keys and pre-shared keys for TLS 1.3. Tom Petch raised the issue, and Hank Berkshoff was going to help resolve the issue, but we've yet to actually resolve the issue. So that remains pending open item. Secondly, in both the key store and trust store drafts, I think it's incumbent upon us to ensure that the language there does not preclude the ability to use the system-defined configuration work that the NetMod working group is engaging in. That currently these built-in keys, that there's discussion about how they show up in operational and maybe they need to be copied into running. But we want to ensure that, if the system work goes forward, that, those keys could alternatively or actually preferably show up in the system data store. So just want to go over the language there and make sure there's no, doesn't preclude that ability. And then the third item that's not listed is that there was a liaison request from IEEE on the key store draft, and kind of related to the same point about built-in keys and the copying them to running. And they had some concerns for, well, you're not really supposed to be copying private keys to running. And in fact, they claim IEEE 802.1 AR spec says you're not allowed to do that. And so I think actually this is just a misunderstanding, because there's the actual key data, and then there's sort of the Yang node that is the parent node of the key data. It's really just the Yang node that needs to be copied into running. I don't think that subtlety was clear enough to them, and we just need to follow up with that liaison request. And I think Rob was going to suggest having a meeting of some sort. Go ahead, Rob.
Yes, so I had a bit of an exchange with Glenn Parsons, the 802.1 working group chair, and I think we'll set up a meeting between you and the person raising this issue myself and Glenn, and see if we can informally work out the right solution, and then also determine whether any sort of liaison back to IEEE is required or not. So the next steps is for me to set up that meeting.
Perfect. And that's it for me, Mahesh. Thanks.
On the agenda for today consists of one chartered item, and that's the UDP-based transport for configured subscription. On the non-chartered item list, we have 3 drafts. Thereafter subscription, I think that's has been presented before, but I guess we'll see an update. We have seen quite a bit of discussion on the transaction ID. So Jan is coming back, having updated the draft. And I believe the list pagination draft has also been presented before. All right, that's as far as the chair slides are concerned. Any comments or questions before we jump into the agenda?
Yeah, this is Kent. I have a comment, which is just basically to all authors to please try to be proactive about bringing discussions to the mailing list. Any issues that you're working through internally, ask the working group for their opinion as well. That's the IETF process and how we do consensus documents. So thank you.
All right, so we have the first draft, which is the UDP note of draft. And I believe, who's presenting it, by the way? Okay, Alex is. Okay, we grant you the permission. Can go ahead.
So hello to everyone. This is Alex presenting a short update on the last UTP notif -04 draft. So on the agenda today, I'm gonna present the different changes we did between the -03 and -04 draft. The received comments we received so far on the mailing list, and finally start a discussion if this draft is stable enough to be last called. So the changes we did on this draft, the first one is regarding the encoding types. We reserved the 0 value as requested on the mailing list and move CBOR to the bottom to comply with the existing implementations of JSON UTP notif. The second one is regarding the TLS. On the last IETF, we submitted at the last moment a DTLS version of UTP notif. We were asked on the mailing list that both drafts should be merged, so we did that. On this draft, there was just explained that we have to use DTLS 1.3 to secure the UTP notif message. We explained the life cycle of this usage, and then that the UTP notif message should be sent as application data of the DTLS layer. We added just this draft as a new section of UTP notif. And then finally, on the IANA section, we demanded the creation of 2 pull requests, one for the encoding types and another one for the option types. So that's the changes so far. The comments, so thank you, Andy Bierman, for your feedback. we were requested to add the reference of the RFCs of the encoding types, JSON, CBOR, and XML. So we will do that. There is still a discussion about which version should be used of CBOR, the RFC one or the draft one. And this morning, I guess, I received also a feedback from Mahesh, so thank you. And yes, we will address this feedback as soon as possible. And then from our side, we consider that our draft is begin to be stable enough. So maybe it should be soon last called, but we let the working group chairs decide that. Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
So one sort of question or concern. So I raised this draft, or what it's been done with the security ADs today. I should have asked them previously. They have some concern about standards track document, basically sending data over an unencrypted channel. So so it's something that we need to work out whether they will allow a standards track document to do that. An information document I think would be okay, but the concern is it over it being a standards track document. So that's something that we need to resolve. We could potentially try getting a sec DIR review, or the other choice might be to see if we can catch one of the security ADs in gather.town this week to chat over this. But I think that's an issue that ideally we would resolve that in a working group before last call if we could. And the other one to be aware of, and I know there's some text about this in the document, is at the same time I asked that question, I got some feedback. Again, we need to check that we cover the sort of transport requirements. So in terms of handling congestion, things like that, I know there's some text into that document, but we just need to make sure that we're quite careful that that's covered as well.
Okay.
So Rob, just to that point, yeah, I think syncing up with the sector or AD would be great. I do actually have some empathy for wanting to support native UDP because I think the use case scenario is actually for a private network consolidator. Like it'd be inside, like literally in the same rack as where the log generator is located, and for so you don't want the overhead of cryptography, but I think so. That's that, and then also notably that we're not actually defining the protocol; we're just simply configuring or enabling said existing protocols to be configured. So these are things that can be discussed with the sector or AD.
Okay.
And then just one other comment actually is if there's anyone can join the note taking, that would be really appreciated. So if people could also help contribute to the notes, that would be helpful, please.
Go ahead, Pierre.
Yes, thank you. Regarding the security support, are you saying that now that the DTLS section is in, so sending UDP messages encrypted in the clear is an option, but the RFC is defining DTLS support as well. So is this not good enough? And also with respect, joining, I think, Kent on this, with respect to the deployment considerations that we have, and if we review the RFC on UDP applications, we are clearly in the field where, I mean, sending messages in the clear should be tolerable. Do you think that there will be an issue with that type of positioning of the draft with respect to security considerations? Or don't you think personally that this is good enough?
So So to answer that question, the answer is I do not know, because it's not my decision as such. I certainly have sympathy with the way that both you and Kent characterise this, that the network is meant to be secure in that regard, a management network, and hence that should be sufficient. I don't know whether that will be good enough for the security ADs or not. It really needs to be, or in the security area, I think is probably a better way of putting it. We need to actually check with them and have a conversation with them. And they may, if we put sufficient mitigations in, that may be good enough. I don't know. But it may be that they just say no, they don't regard that the overhead of encrypting this is high enough to justify not always encrypting it. That I don't know. I have to ask them.
Okay. There are a lot of protocols where we would need to redo that discussion then. But okay, I follow. With respect to congestion, I think it's covered in the draft. So on your comment with respect to use of UDP and congestion in the network, when we discuss the applicability and the concerns that you have when you design a UDP application, I think it's covered. But I mean, we can have this discussion offline if you want. And if it's not good enough, we can work on this description more. So, thanks.
All right, so I had actually one comment and one question, or I'm trying to answer one of the questions, I think, that was asked on the mailing list. I believe that the draft talks about, a transmission timer, not a retransmission timer, but a transmission timeout value to be set, at which point, there's no attempt to try to, but there's no configuration in the Yang model for actually configuring the transmission timeout. So I don't know if the intention is to keep that timer or not keep that timer. So that was one of the questions. The other is that, is there a request for a well-known UDP port in the draft? Because I don't remember seeing it in the INA section. Maybe I missed it. Go ahead, Pierre.
Yeah, so with respect to the timeout, I'm scratching my head a bit, but it might be for the retention time when you use segmentation. Yeah, maybe
Yes.
we may want, okay. If it's that, then yeah, we may want to have it configured. I'm not sure people are going to care much changing this with respect to the default value that would be provided by vendors. Yeah, and oh, sorry, I forgot your last question, your second question. What was it? Just the name, and
that was the well-known UDP port.
Oh yeah, this, I think it was there in the past and we removed it because no one cares. So we decided to not, to let this go through configuration, and that would be it anyway.
Okay.
And also it does not make too much sense because you are going to, open multiple ports on the collection side, maybe on the same machine, but on different ports to do some load sharing, etc. So you're going to end up configuring it and changing this anyway. So having a single default value does not make too much sense when we look at the big picture of the deployment. So in my opinion, it's not really needed and no one was caring. So I think we removed it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. We're just a little bit over. We should move on to the next presentation.
Right, okay.
And
Excellent.
I saw Qifeng in the
Hello,
list.
everyone.
Oh, there she
You
is.
can see my slides, right?
Yes.
Okay, so on behalf of the authors, I'm here to present the adaptive subscription to Yang notification draft. I believe that this work has already been presented for several times. An adaptive subscription can fit in the scenario with massive data collection and processing with expensive data management cost. Usually, the higher frequency data collection leads to more resource consumption, while low frequency data collection may lead to insufficient data for photo localization. There is an example given in the draft in a wireless network performance monitoring case. when the signal strength falls below a configured threshold, the notification can be streamed at a higher rate for troubleshooting, while when the signal strength crosses that threshold, the notification can be streamed at a lower rate. So our proposal is to enable the client to configure an adaptive subscription update policy, which contains a condition and allows the server to switch to different period intervals based on the condition. And the condition is expressed using a standard Expat evaluation criteria. But in last IETF meeting, there is one issue. I think it was raised by Rob, which is about the arbitrary Expat complexity. Since the condition expression requires Expat evaluation, this might complexity. Yes, but we all know that YAML-push also needs to configure selection filter to identify a targeted node or subtree, and it is a similar selection filter used by adaptive subscription. And a new section was added in the update to discuss arbitrary Expat complexity. And there are 4 points given as a reminder that although they have already been well supported by Expat itself, the following design choices should be very careful to make, and they may add extra complexity for implementation. First is to support Expat evaluation criteria against every data objects. And the second is to support any type of node set in the Expat evaluation criteria. The third is to support both objects to be compared in the Expat evaluation criteria and node sets. And the last one is both objects to be compared are in different data type. And then also to try to reduce the complexities of this arbitrary Expat evaluation, we give the following design principles recommendation. First, Expat evaluation criteria against minimum set of data objects in the data model. And this minimum set of data objects could be advertised using the notification capability module defined in an ongoing work. And second, it should be integer-based filter, which represents signed and unsigned integers of different sizes. And last one is about compared objects requirements. We recommend that it should be an one-to-one numeric comparison. The one object to be compared in the Expat expression should be a leaf data node, and the other object to be compared is expected to be an integer. So, and the result of the Expat expression is converted to a boarding value. Yeah. So I think this is the end of my presentation. So let me just stop here and see if there's any other comments and questions about this. Yeah, Rob, please go ahead.
Thank you. Could you go back a slide, please? So thank you. I saw that you'd sent me a summary of the text that you proposed on changing this, and I think that that's on the right tracks. I had intended to send some comments back today. I've run out of time. I think that the description about why it's complex, I think that can be probably condensed down. But in terms of your solution, I think that seems reasonable, as in I quite like the idea of being able to advertise the set of objects you're allowed to perform this on. Through the capabilities draft. I think restricting it to like integer-based filtering and simplified comparison, again, I think that makes sense. I don't object to allowing implementations to support a more complex filter. I think the key for me is that it would be good if at least every implementation had to at least support these basic filters, because those my concern is about running a generic XPath evaluation engine repeatedly that may be too expensive. So I think that makes sense. And then one other thing I would add is that it would be useful to have a well-defined error code or error to be returned if you do allow more complex queries to then have an error code to say when the configuration is put in to say, no, this is too complex, I can't handle this.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, I think it makes sense, yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I was on the other window typing notes. So the concern for arbitrary complexity in XPath may also be appearing in the list pagination work that's going to be presented later in this session. And there's a concern for, if you have these arbitrary expressions and you're mapping to a backend database, how can you do that for, some databases aren't that rich in their query language syntax. And so I think it's one thing to say there needs to be a minimum set, and then there may be more complexity, but how does the client know what extra complexity is supported by the server? And so then we may need to have some ability to enumerate or somehow otherwise enable the server to advertise what all the extra expressions that they're supporting. And so I see that desire maybe showing up here in this work and also in the list pagination work.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I guess we can move to the next deck.
Yeah, I think so. And also, while we're moving to the next deck, and Jan, you're up, the previous presentation on the UDP notif, Alex, was that you speaking or was that Pierre speaking?
It was Alex speaking during the draft, and then I answered, and it was Pierre answering the questions after.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Go ahead, Jan.
Thank you. So this is the second presentation of this NetConf transaction ID work that started a year ago. And basically, it's about the mechanism that reduces traffic and work and decreases reliability when it comes to getting and editing configuration on the server. So I presented the initial work at IETF109 a year ago. And since then, I've made some investigations of how much impact this would have in a sort of real world network. And we have made some changes going from 00 to 01. And just to recapitulate very quickly, I took a real world application, but running in a lab. So it was not actually real world in the true sense of an operator running something, but it was running in a lab and it's a real world application, and analyzed the traffic in that situation with this application running. One eyebrow raiser that a lot of people reacted to was that 91% of the traffic was actually in Yang 1.0 hello messages. So that's something for implementers to watch out for, to move to Yang 1.1 to get rid of that. But simulating or calculating what sort of savings we'd have with this draft, I could see that we would go down from 569 to 378 round trips for this particular application running for 3 hours, and almost half the amount of configuration data being exchanged. So I think there is some value to this, but actually the real value that I see in this work is not so much to reduce round trips or number of bytes being sent between client and server, but it is the reliability that a set of clients can work reliably towards a set of servers and not clobber each other. So that's really the main point here. And the reduced traffic is a kind of nice bonus. So what I did from 00 to 01, okay, I clarified things based on feedback on the list. I separated out the E-tag specifics into, so that it's very clearly in some parts, and non-E-tag, the general mechanism is described in separate parts. I changed a few names based on feedback from the list. there was a slight harmonization between the mechanism that we had with names of transaction IDs with RFCs 7232 and 8040. There was almost the same before, but now it's more exactly the same. There was a lot of discussion between when it comes to who should set transaction IDs. Should transaction IDs be set by the server, or could they also be set by the client? And since there was so much controversy about that, I completely removed the option for clients to set it. I still think that's a good idea, and I'll make a case for that in a few minutes. Because I removed that, I had to add some other, I had to adjust the mechanism a little bit so that transaction IDs can be returned in a different way. So moving on here.
This point. Okay, I'm going to try to text him. Okay, so I think he's going to try to adjust and come back.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know what happened there.
Go ahead.
I just closed and opened the mic again. So how far did you hear?
I think you just started on this particular slide.
All right, very good, thanks. So here are the open questions, and I'll quickly go through each one of them and explain what we have chosen to write in the draft. These are all the alternatives that were raised on the list. So for the e-tags, we have now adjusted the e-tag assignment, so the transaction ID values, to match exactly what it says in REST-conf and 7232. It was almost the same before, but now it's more exactly. But other alternatives were also suggested. But that's what the draft says now. And there's no particular text in the draft when it comes to how you format these strings. It's left as a sort of open-ended string. There are some rules as according to 8040. There is no support for timestamps. That's a mechanism that exists in REST-conf when they have transaction IDs there. You can use timestamps. But for a number of reasons that I will not go into today, I skipped that, and only this transaction IE tag style transaction IDs are supported in this draft. We have this question that I mentioned earlier, that is it allowed for a client to say, I want you to use this particular transaction ID when it sends in an edit config to a server? And right now, there's no text about that at all in this draft, but I'll come back to that in a minute and explain why I think that's a good idea. Similarly, there is some people ask that maybe even if we don't assign e-tags this way, maybe we could allow clients to send in a free-form string to associate with each transaction, because then you can send in things like who was doing this, why it was done, which customer it belongs to, order numbers and whatnot. If you can put comments on there, so that you can use the transaction, you can add transaction metadata basically. But right now, there's no such language in the draft at all. And then we have a question about granularity. So when you maintain this transaction ID for data store, do you do that only for the data store as a whole? Or can the server implementers pick some more containers and list elements around in the data model where they think it makes sense and maintain transaction IDs for them as well? Or could server implementers pick any element, not just containers and list elements, but sort of any leaf they like and whatever they think makes sense at all? Or even should it be the client that decides which elements that we maintain transaction IDs for dynamically in runtime? Right now, the draft explains how this is done when it comes to the data stores and some containers and list elements as picked by the server implementer. Some other open questions where we could think about new development is to indicate which elements in the Yang model that have transaction IDs associated with them by using system capabilities. As we just talked about in the previous presentation here, there's of course a lot of config false data being requested by clients as well. And by using transaction ID sim type of metadata, you could actually probably reduce the amount of data being transported for config false data as well, quite dramatically, or maybe with similar numbers as you saw in the beginning here. But that is not included at this time. And we could possibly eliminate some use cases where you use locking if you add e-tags for commit and a few other operations as well. So that could be an interesting development, but it's not in there right now. And let me just use the last 2 minutes to try to explain the case for why it might make sense to let clients assign the transaction IDs when they're sending edit configs. So here on the left, you see a client that's sending an edit config with some blah, blah, blah going over to the server. And the server then returns, if it's using this transaction ID thing, it's returning an OK, and also adding a sort of transaction ID. Say, yeah, I know. And we call all these things that changed now, AB56, 36, and so on. And the only difference if the client assigns the transaction ID is that you add one more element in the edit config optionally for the client. Yeah, I want to call this thing 47390, and then the server returns 47390 at the end. So it's very easy to implement this. Otherwise, the server would have to come up with this sort of random value. Now it doesn't even have to use the random function anymore because it just gets this served from the client. I want you to call this, and that's what it gets back. So it's very easy to implement. And I claim that this allowing the client to send this value is a high value thing, because if here on the left, if you don't allow the client to do that, it computes a transaction, sends a few edit configs to the number of servers, and they respond in their time. And the client has to wait for the slowest of them to respond before it knows the transaction ID and can update its database with what happened. Then it can start computing the next transaction, sending out a few more edit configs, wait for all other responses to update the database and so on, to keep track of what's going on. Whereas on the right side here, if you compute, the client can compute the transaction and it sends out these edit configs, it already specifies which transaction IDs things should have. So the database it has locally here is already up to date with what's going on. And then the service can respond in their time. And we are already on to the next thing, and it increases the performance quite a bit. And of course, this would be an optional feature. So I don't think all servers or so all clients and servers would have to implement this. But for those that participate in high performance scenarios, this could be interesting. And I think I'm just on time going to the last slide, which is saying, are we happy with these open questions falling the way they put them here, or do we want to have more discussion on the list, or maybe even an interim? Thank you.
So this is Kent, as chair. I think you had some open issues and there was no time for discussion. I know we're on a tight schedule here with the interims. I do think we should take items to the list. So for each of your open issues, please start a separate thread, and those can be discussed there. Thank you.
Okay.
So actually, I'm going to forego my cue and let Benoit go ahead.
So I'll be quick, Ken and Mash. So basically, I really support transaction ID being initiated by the client, or at least having a way to label a transaction, because if we put in there the service request ID coming from the orchestrator, and it adds great value in case we have multiple clients configuring a server, and we could do a lookup there, see exactly what was changed at a point in time. So I'll expand on the list because we're short on time.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Benoit. All right, since we left with only 15 minutes, maybe we should move to the next deck. And Chen.
Yeah, while we're bringing that up, I guess Chen's presenting. And Benoit, I do also think there's value there. We just need to discuss the best way to introduce it.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Chen.
See your
Okay.
slides and hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Qing. So I'm here to present the list pagination mechanism for NetConf and ResConf. We have 3 drafts, and the name we list here are author. We actually set up design team for this. Next. Oh,
I think you're presenting your own.
oh, sorry, I forgot. Yeah, yeah. The recap a little bit. Motivation. So why we want to do this actually. Actually, when you retrieve 19 number, the entry from list and the leave list, actually, you may actually don't have a very user-friendly client interface. Actually, for a client that may take a quite long time to retrieve this list. So we'll introduce quite a lot of latency, and also client may consume a lot of resource. So our idea is to try to leverage the server-side processing combined with some backend storage system. And for example, index mechanism allow you to allocate the data without need to search all the row in the database table. So we try to borrow this concept and use in this list and leave list retriever. So this draft has already been presented in IETF109, and we got quite a lot of discussion on ResConf connection problem. This actually, we have a draft that we call the ResConf connection, which get expired. So we actually use this as basis to come up with this idea. Yeah, and so before we discuss list pagination, we actually have 3 key acronyms. First is list pagination. Really, it is a standard mechanism to control the filtering, sorting, retrieval entry, and of list and leave list. And also we have 2 acronym we call the list pagination NetConf and list pagination for ResConf, which focus on protocol extension to support list pagination. And so what do we do actually since IETF 109? Actually, we factored out one of the list pagination draft from the other 2. One is focused on NetConf, the other focused on ResConf, and we rename the count and the skip parameter into the limit and offset because we borrow the concept of secure language from the backend database. So they use a limit and offset, and that's why we switch to these 2 terminology. And we also define, for list pagination, define the 5 query parameter, which will be discussed in detail in the later slides. And also for dissident list pagination, we also introduce 1 query parameter we call the sublist limit. And also we actually extend the server capability extension and to actually define the per node tags. And in addition, we actually in the appendix we define the example young data model, dataset, and query, which will be reused by the NetConf draft and the ResConf draft. And so the other 2 draft, the first NetConf, and we already post this draft and we made the update. So the main change actually is we change a new RPC to augmenting 3 NetConf RPC. One is NetConf, and also we have get config and get config and get data. The second change we actually try to reuse the grouping defined in the list pagination draft and in this netconf draft. And also we actually provide an example to show how it works. And for RESTconf, and we actually update RFC 8040 and align query parameter for RESTconf. And we also declare list and leaf list as a valid resource target for get. And optionally, we can support delete operation based the discussion with the design team member. And we think for young model, we don't think it is value. We don't see any parameter is really needed in this model. So we remove this young model for this pagination RESTconf. And so let's drill down a little bit into this pagination draft. And we actually define several query parameter. The first is where, and the second is sort by. And where actually Ken already mentioned, we do support this kind of filter expression, and we provide example for this. And for sort by, very similar to the order by. Actually, the by default, if sort by is not set, actually will fall back to the order by. And direction, we support forward and backward direction of the results to be returned. And also key parameter is offset and limit, and which actually apply to the list and leaf list, and it can be returned the number of entry to be skipped or the number of entry to be returned. And then we also introduce sublist limit parameter, which only apply to the dissident list and leaf list. And we also set the processing order. The first high priority order is where, and then is sort by and direction, offset, and limit. And in this chapter, we also introduce a metadata attribute we call the remaining. And a remaining parameter can use together with limit query or sub list limit query. And it can be used to return the number of entry not included due to the limit or sublist limit operation. And here is we show the example of how this combination 6 query parameter can be used in the request and response message to guide the how list and leaf list should be returned. So you can see this example, and we actually use the where, sort by, and direction, and offset, and limit. And the example has already documented in the appendix of 3.7. And given the time limit, I will skip this. And in addition, we introduce another example to discuss how remaining is used in the request and response. Actually, this remaining actually can be applied to the dissident list and leaf list. So we gave 2 examples. The difference is the target node is different. One is just applied to the one data node we call the member whose name is Alice. The second, the target node actually is data store. It is internal data store. So response will be different. Actually, we provide the data set, and you can use these remaining to get a different results. And so we also introduce serverless pagination capability discovery. This is really actually built on top of the server capability draft. Actually, we augment from system capability with 2 key parameters we call the constraint parameter. The first one indicates which config force list or leaf list node are constrained. It will apply to the parent node. And the second is indexed. This actually apply to the child node actually, which will show actually which node may be used in the where and sort by expression. And we also allow some future extension. Here we give the example. You may not support 100% XPath 1.0. For example, you support some of the XPath function. For some other XPath function you don't support. So we can allow such extension because for backend database system, they may have different capabilities. So we should allow such variety difference. And the second is NetConf draft, and you can see the overview of this model structure. Actually, we augment the 3 NetConf RPC statement: get config, get data. So you can see the parameter, actually align with list pagination draft, and almost the same query parameter, and also the same data type are applied to different RPC statements. And we also gave an example to show how these parameters can be used in the request and response messaging pair. And the second one is RESTconf draft. For RESTconf, actually, we really try to update RFC 8040. The first protocol change we introduced, we add a list and leaf list as a valid resource target for the get and delete operation. And we also try to apply to the related HTTP method, for example, get and head. And second, actually, we add a new media type, application young data XML list. And for application young data JSON, actually, we try to reuse the one defined in RFC 8040. We don't need to, reinvent the wheels. The third protocol extension we introduced is we add 6 new query parameter, and we also, give example of how these can be applied to the delete operation for the list. So this example already documented in the appendix 3.2. So we do have 2 open issues we like to solicit some feedback. The first one is about cursor support. Actually, our pagination ID actually the key parameter is offset and limit. Actually, we usually will call it as offset-based pagination. But in some cases, you may need consider whether we need to support cursor-based pagination. So what is the cursor-based pagination? So it really enables the paging to continue over the snapshot despite the dataset changing. For example, you add one more entry, or you may delete one more entry. For the client, actually, it may don't know whether the list gets changed. So you can assume that the client, so the client actually make assumption actually the list doesn't make a change. But for server, if without cursor support, actually, in some cases, so we may have some, corner case. It may return the larger remaining value than the previous fetch. So one example, you may refetching the paging in a time series log. The log can be grow too large. Actually, can be appended at the end, and so this will face these kind of cases. And so for config, actually many systems have a internal read write mux exclusive. Actually, so the cursor based on our design team discussion seems maybe not needed. So we also have some mechanism to try to address this. For example, we have entity tag timestamp. This can be used to detect the dynamic list change. Also, we have some error code message. This error code message can be used to indicate the end of the list. So we think we lack a companion use case for this. If someone have some concrete use cases, please let us know, and we will see how to support this cursor in the list pagination draft. And the second one is about the remaining annotation. So the remaining is used to return the number of the elements not included in the result set. Actually, the current draft stated that if no elements were removed, this annotation must not appear. But it uses the minimum value 0 to represent the unknown. actually, based on some discussion, one of the proposal is whether we can use 0 to represent no more entry, but for unknown maybe means not return the remaining annotation. So for this, we haven't reached agreement among the design team member. So we like to hear your comments on this. So that's it.
Shin, we are actually completely out of time. So
Yeah.
you might want to take both these open issues to the mailing list to
Okay.
discussion there.
Okay. Just want to quick mention we have invitation, one from Ken, the other from Orf. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Please take it to the list. And thanks everyone for attending the meeting. See you on the mailing
Thank
list.
you.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I was on mute or not. I was saying all the authors could please take their open issues to the list. And then for everyone, thank you for the discussion, and we'll continue the discussion on the list. Please have a good rest of the day.